Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday, and thank you for joining. I'm Michelle Noyes, Head of Americas for AIMA, and I'm excited to moderate today's conversation on Agentic AI. We'll be covering what it is, how it works, and use cases for both fund marketers and allocators. A huge thanks to Central for supporting today's session, and to Eric, Gardner, and James for sharing. I love moderating these sessions because it's a real opportunity to learn aloud. And while I try to come up with all of the questions and I have plenty to steer the conversation, there is also an opportunity to ask those of your own using the Q&A tab. We'll try to get through as many as possible, but please leave them there. And if we don't get through live, we'll make sure you have the contact details afterwards. Now, on to the main show. So, Gardner, I'm going to start with you. You run client solutions at Anchorage and have been thinking hard about where AI frees up your team and time. What's your current setup in terms of how you're using AI?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think as a general comment, everyone on our team is kind of discovering new use cases every day. We're mainly using Claude and ChatGPT, and are using those for a wide range of use cases. So think about just investor meeting prep notes, summarizing portfolio performance and positioning data for kind of meeting prep purposes. Even, for me, interpreting legal language in an offering document, into layman's terms so I can understand it. That's where we're actively using more agentic AI tools has been with respect to, kind of the higher volume DDQ and RFP responses where, we maybe previously relied upon some combination of human memory and keyword searches to kind of extract the best fit response. But in general, kind of been trying to assess, where on that use case continuum between, generalist and specialist AI tools we are. And I think with the kind of DDQ and RFP specific use case, we're finding there's value in that kind of subject matter expertise that you get with, kind of more specialized architecture, but also trying to think about, how that kind of more specialist or generalist agent can interact with each other. But I don't have all the answers, but at a high level, that's our setup today.
Yeah, and we're certainly going to dig into that. And, I don't know, I find it's just gratifying what a hard nut our DDQ automation is to crack. As, someone who has filled them out, that was my first entree to AIMA probably 15 years ago. And it's something we spend a lot of time about. So if any of you out there listening have spent way too many hours of your life filling out DDQs, thank your human brain. It's very specialized for this task. But we'll see where AI can certainly make a lot of inroads. James, you've been a career allocator and CIO at scale, including at large institutions like AIMCO and Russell. What are some of the use cases in AI broadly that most excite you?
Good morning, Michelle. I think the interesting thing here is if you think about the business of allocation or manager research, it is an exceptionally data-intensive business, and it's a dynamic business. People are changing, organizations are changing, portfolios are changing, markets are changing. So there's a deep array of information on portfolios, companies, people, organizations. It's dynamic through time, and it's across hundreds, if not thousands, of products. And so it's actually for forever, over decades, been a very intensive process, whether that be having literally hundreds of analysts doing research, collecting information, running analysis, aggregating that, distributing that, formatting that. And so I think there are two sort of big areas, I would say two domains that I'm really excited about in the space. One is more on the qualitative side. How do you capture and synthesize that information? And some of those tools are actually really good at doing that. And on the second domain is really on the quantitative side, is how do we are we able to kind of collect, organize, analyze information, share that, ultimately with the goal of making better decisions. And so I think we got to kind of always trade that off between what are some of the opportunities for operational efficiencies which people have been pursuing for decades, and what are some of the opportunities that are going to actually help us make better decisions.
That's a great point. And, I'm grateful to both of you because I think it's important and helpful to have both sides of the manager allocator equation represented in this conversation. It does make my job and all of our jobs harder because there's so much content to squeeze into the next 55 minutes. But it is really important to understand, kind of who's doing what on both sides of that equation, so that you can best position your workflow and kind of come in with the right mindset. But Eric, bringing you into this, you were an allocator, longtime allocator before you moved to the build side at Central. Can you share a little bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, been an allocator for about 30 years and was very fortunate to be a part of two of the pioneering groups in the space, SEI in the 90s and Goldman in the early 2000s. And these were groups that were applying new business models, new technologies, tech forward. It's probably not a coincidence that both Gardner and James have kind of similar overlapping heritage. But we at Central are doing what I really think is the next generation of applying technologies. And if you think about the AI and agentic technology, this is exponential. So incredibly, incredibly powerful. My team is made up of subject matter experts, and we're utilizing our own experience and skill sets combined with an industry network of industry leaders to combine with our technology team. We're a Silicon Valley-based firm out in Mountain View, California, to create tools and solutions to bring what we think will be profound increases in efficiency and productivity, both for manager research teams as well as investor relation teams.
That's a
In
great
in a
grounding.
nutshell.
In a nutshell, well, we again, so much to say unpack crack if we're going to use this metaphor. So let's make sure we all have a shared vocabulary here. We're talking about agentic AI. So, Eric, in plain terms, what makes something an agent versus a chatbot that people have been using widely for 2 years or more?
Sure. Maybe I'll do a brief definition, but then go through an example to shed some
Yeah.
light here. The characteristics of an agent versus a chatbot is that it is multi-step, ideally end-to-end workflow. It learns and has the ability to act autonomously. And this iterative process really is what unlocks the power and the intelligence of the technology. But let me just use an example. Probably the best metaphor is a colleague or an analyst metaphor. A chatbot basically is akin to a personal assistant or a junior analyst that solves a point solution. So let's take an example of doing a news scan on, let's say, Jones Asset Management. Information comes up that the analyst can scan news and see that Jones Asset Management got bought. Where agents come into play, they're more akin to mid-level analysts or mid-level IR professionals. So taking that news that Jones Asset Management got bought and thinking about what the implications are for that news in terms of autonomy, alignment of interests, what are the implications from an investment standpoint, and what does that do to the investment thesis on Jones? The ultimate power of the agentic structure is so strong agents that meet the full technology potential are akin to senior analysts, senior IR team members, all the way up to potentially deputy CIOs or major sales assistants. In that case, they would take the news of Jones Asset Management getting bought and infuse other information from the firm and from the industry, prior notes, prior conversations, what the implications are for revenue share, et cetera, and would automatically update the investment committee memo and scoring on the manager research side. And if Jones is a competitor on the IR side, would perhaps proactively send out an email emphasizing, the independence of our firm and how we feel that we can best execute on the portfolio based on that independence. So it's really a full spectrum of end-to-end workflows that incorporate the intelligence of the firm, the intelligence of the industry, and multiple inputs. Maybe to shed a little bit of light on it, I
Can you give us a
will,
visual?
yeah, I'll share some
In
of
the spirit of
the
showing, not just telling, but I think that was super helpful.
So if you give me 1 second. So our team has created off-the-shelf agents and as well as a harness to enable our clients to customize and build their own agents. But as an example, on the allocator side, we have agents that cover everything from initial screen or investability, or what could be called a kill report, to analyze an initial manager, through to creating tear sheets, to an entire investment committee and monitoring memo, as an example. On the IR side of the business, I'll pull that up as
And we are
well.
recording this, so for those of you who can't write so fast, we wanted to give you a quick visual. You can hit pause on second watch.
But on the IR side of the business, everything from prospecting, so pulling in, multiple sources of information about mandates and clients. There are a lot of different sources out there, bringing them all together and synthesizing them, to applying more intelligence of a specific concrete knowledge of the unique characteristics of a manager's product and matching how that fits with prospects and clients' specific and unique needs. So if you think about a large cap growth manager or a lower middle market private credit manager, not just saying that there's an open mandate for a large cap growth manager or private credit, but thinking about specifically if there's a certain level of, the turnover, the size of the team, the ownership structure, and matching that with the preferences and personas of prospective investors. So there's a big difference, could be a big difference between an Ivy endowment versus a public pension, as an example. And there could be, it will take into account elements like, is the prospective manager de-risking, and what are the other holdings they have in their portfolio, and how could our product be a particular fit? And that level of intelligence gets brought into the prospecting and the prioritization, but also the meeting prep. So one example is a meeting prep agent that will take into account these unique factors, and actually provide action-oriented preparation. Here's how we differ. Here's what the client will likely find most attractive, and here's some of the more challenging elements, as an example. But to give a full flavor of the agents that we have built out of the box, but then there's the option, and we work with our clients to create their own agents and to expand upon these off-the-shelf ones.
And we'll have another quick show and tell in a little bit just to show you how an agent works. But James and Gardner, bring you back into this. I think what makes this really interesting is you've both, throughout your careers, not to call you old, but you've built these processes by hand for decades, right? You've done it the hard way, you've done it the analog way, and now, you're putting in that time to see what can be automated. So each of you, starting with James and then Gardner, what's one thing that an agent does that you couldn't do before?
So Michelle, I think I mentioned earlier how this business can be data intensive, and I think for example, an organization like Russell invests across multiple asset classes, multiple strategies, multiple products, and so literally you'd end up with hundreds of portfolios each and every day. And so how we would go about analyzing that was actually just kind of brute force in many respects, right? It was having lots of analysts run the fact set reports, generate the reports, slowly automate those, create the output. And then I think, once that was too much, we said, okay, well, here's a good idea. Let's outsource that to a lower cost, but actually a lower cost so that we could do more. And there was this never-ending kind of thirst for knowledge and analytics. And so as we moved into this agentic era, setting up those paradigms or algorithms to think about, these are the scope of portfolios I want to analyze, these are the types of analysis I want to do, this is how I want to interpret it or have the results presented back to me, are things that would have been, literally like $1 million projects or more not that long ago. And now you're actually in a position where you can actually do that. Not only do you have to wait, historically you would have waited days or weeks to get the information back, and slowly that window's collapsed, and now it's almost instantaneously, right? Like it can run in the background. By the time you've made a cup of coffee, you've got the answers to what would have been, and not just time, but actually the cost of producing has come down significantly. So I do think there's been big changes around, certainly on the analytical side. That it has changed a lot. Some of the other things that I think the agentic pieces really open up. I think of the old model was much more discrete. It was very specific, very constrained, right? Like run this report on this portfolio to give me a sector attribution report. The model around the agentic is it does a much better job at thinking about how do we consolidate things, how do we generate content. So actually more generative rather than a very kind of sort of direct translation. So I think the generative capacities have been vastly improved, and the flexibility as well. I think it's no longer large IT projects. If you want to change something or add a dashboard, it can be done in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, but I think that's really powerful, right? Because you as a business owner, knowing the problem you want to solve, sometimes it can be iterative to kind of explain that, and that's a lot
Correct.
easier when you're riffing with AI versus having to deliver a formal brief.
Yeah, and I think that's, so you talk about riffing. It was interesting. I was meeting with someone from a university yesterday who was running an entrepreneurship program, an innovation program, and they taught a lot about velocity. And so their whole game was, how quickly can we iterate? How quickly can we learn? And so I think this framework really allows us to increase the velocity of learning and iterative those solutions. This is what I'd like to see. And when you get what you would like to see, you learn something from that. And instead of having to initiate, scope, and get approved another IT project, those changes can be implemented. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the ability that we've created, this opportunity to increase the velocity of learning within organizations.
Great point. Gardner, how about you?
Yeah, so I think similar to James, I wouldn't say that our old workflows couldn't do something, but an agent can do it faster with more precision, less friction, and probably enhance the collaboration in some of our workflows. I wouldn't say that we 100% always trust AI to perform the task. There's always a human with subject matter expertise overseeing and signing off on the output. But just to bring it to life a little bit, and there are probably parallels here with what James commented on. Take a kind of meeting or a call prep. The cadence of update calls with our LPs varies, depending on the product, whether it's monthly, quarterly, year to date, annual, and the information that an LP wants to glean from those calls varies as well, right? Whether it's top contributors, detractors, exposure changes, deployment, monetizations, harvest projections, etc. We have, call it 8 different drawdown fund vintages across a couple of different strategies, a number of SMAs. So in our case, if you have an update call with an LP who's invested in a few different vintages in all different stages of their life cycle, and the investor wants quarter to date and year to date commentary, like the speed with which AI can take a couple of different portfolio or risk exposure reports over the time period in question and summarize that information, it just materially kind of speeds up the prep time
Mhm.
for that call. But importantly, I still have those risk reports as reconciliation tools, right, for a sanity check. But in general, I think that just the speed and precision with which we can prepare to answer questions about an investor specific experience is greatly enhanced. But you need kind of clean data in order for AI to be effective. And I think you still need that ability to confirm the accuracy of what it's generating.
Yeah, and we'll spend a good amount of time talking about governance because that's critically important. But either of you, is there something that you've done, maybe in the past week that you never would have thought you would have trusted AI with, a year ago? I mean, I'll go first, right? Like I always test it. I produce a lot of agendas for conferences and things like that, and it's always been so mediocre and blah. But I gave it a run while I was cooking dinner the other night. I'm like, oh, yeah, I go work. And it delivered something that's probably better than like 85% of the agendas I see out there. I'm like, oh wow, and this is the need, right? Um, you always have to kind of keep testing it because it keeps changing and evolving, and maybe it couldn't do something a couple of months ago, and now it can.
Yeah. So to me, Michelle, it seems at least in terms of the delta, the biggest difference has been leveraging the large language models. So that seems to have been the big breakthrough over the last couple of years. From a quantitative and analytical perspective, we've been using pretty sophisticated statistical techniques for many years, right? And so yes, there are some improvements, and yes, there are some innovations there. But to me, the real stark change in terms of impacting workflow is how the large language models are applied. You mentioned creating an agenda for a meeting or whatever the case might be. I've always been amazed at like even just transcribing a meeting. It's not we had basic transcription, but actually now in some respects, it does a better job than I would at summarizing the meeting, blocking it into sections that are relevant. With a little bit of prompting, you can actually get that really dialed into the things that you care about and how you want the meeting structured, what the follow-ups are. So I think certainly on the meeting notes, summarizing information, summarizing large volumes of information. If you're getting 60-page document, synthesizing that are all tasks that I think it's really well designed for. To me, seems to be the biggest delta and over the last year or two.
Yeah. And Gardner, is there anything that's felt like particularly kind of transformational for how you and your team have been working, or has it freed up time to do something different or new?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of in terms of the day to day, as I mentioned earlier, the primary area where we've kind of sought to incorporate agentic AI into our workflows is on kind of processing those higher volume kind of DDQ and lower volume but lengthy RFP responses. So I think what an agent's been able to do for us is kind of implement a response library with strategy specific or topic specific tagging, and be able to maintain that library going forward. I think that was something that was just very manual, labor intensive previously. And then be able to kind of leverage that to populate responses going forward. But I think the collaboration is also, collaboration across stakeholders has also been valuable in a way that it creates an audit trail and traceability, reduces friction in those workflows, and just kind of information sharing, kind of enhancing our team's ability to kind of leverage each other's work product. Like is all kind of
Is that like sharing skills between one another and
so that we've experimented with is creating a like a shared project. So we were tinkering the other day with kind of some of the harvest profile data of our funds and coming up with just kind of a summary of those projections and the drivers of those projections. All the information's there. It's just, summarizing it can take time. So yeah, all of that has been valuable.
Really interesting. One more question in James, and then Eric, I'm going to have you show us again, giving a visual of what this looks like. But James, you said there's always more data, more products, more opportunity than you can ever use, right? Even when you're at the helms of some of the largest allocators in the world. So how does an allocator use agents to sort through the inbound and manage the portfolio they already hold?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Shah. I think there's two pieces to that. One is just managing the operational workflow, right? I think most of that comes in either through some kind of web portal or by email, or by meeting. So like actually capturing that information. In the old days, you'd have a meeting, you'd get a hard copy of the presentation. You would then file the presentation, and you would file them in their folder and keep massive drawers in a library going effectively, right? Then we moved to the digital version of that, which was then save the PDF in a folder. I think just streamlining that flow so that actually the data is captured automatically, it's stored, it's indexed, and that way it's very easy to summarize it. So we talked about some of the sort of generative capabilities and the large language model side. It would be pretty easy to go and say, here's 60 pitches or 60 decks. Go review the decks and summarize them across my criteria, and provide me, kind of those that are incomplete, those that meet my criteria, and I should consider more deeply. And so that sort of workflow piece of it on the qualitative side, there's a fair bit to be done there. I do think, given the number of choices, I think many are try and be much more directed in what they are looking for, rather than whoever knocks on the door gets preference. I think you need to be very deliberate in if you are running a search, run the search, have some criteria for that, and be very specific. Otherwise, you get overwhelmed like really, really quickly, and you have some selection bias, right? The person knocking on your door is not necessarily the person you should be allocating capital to. So be deliberate in it, design it thoughtfully, set the parameters, and then you can use the tools to actually aggregate that information, compile it, synthesize it, and really create some leverage on your time. So that would be one side, certainly on the qualitative aspect, where there's some benefits. On the sort of more analytical side and on the portfolio side, there's a lot to be done there. And one of the things which I think we'll touch on at some point is the notion of where does the information sit? How much of the information is public in the public domain, and how much of it is in either behind paywalls or on private in nature? And I think that is typically the industry is relatively outside of listed public securities, where there are very specific regulations around what needs to be disclosed and available publicly. In the private space, it's a lot harder to get your hands on that information. It's a lot harder to access it. It's a lot harder to capture it in a systematic way. And so I think there's some big opportunities there for us to figure out how do we systematically get access to that information and then leverage that in the allocators process. So right now, all that information is organized around for the manager at their platform, and they decide who gets what. And so it is a little bit of a barrier for these tools right now, is that actually they don't have access to the information. So how can they use it? How can it be synthesized? So that's one piece. There's a whole school of work, which is really just building on the work that's been done over many years, is how do you synthesize a universe of a few thousand products down to the products that are relevant to you. And so I think now that's become much more accessible. You don't have to have a PhD in mathematical finance to be able to code up an algorithm to run a search with particular criteria. That can be done. It's become much more accessible. So if you have some ideas or a thesis around what's important, and that might be incorporating AUM data, performance data, attribution data, holdings data, risk data, you can build something that effectively your own custom search engine that'll narrow, kind of create a funnel of thousands of products down to the products that you like. And so I think that's something that it's empowered many of the allocators that had the, let's call it the investment acumen, but didn't necessarily have, weren't able to go and code up in Python, and weren't able to necessarily go and create like a sophisticated algorithm, but can now be done very accessible. And actually the power is really having the investment acumen to know what's important to make the decision. So I actually think it's been this next, let's call it decade, will be very empowering to the allocators to be more efficient and more skillful in what they do.
Yeah, and again, I think this is recently we have an investor relations peer group, and in our most recent meeting, we heard from an allocator, again, just really highlighting how LPs are using these tools. So, as a fund marketer, when you're going out, you really want to understand what your pitch is going to look like through the lens of an AI reader as well as the human at the end of it. But let's speaking about what it's going to look like, Eric, can you show us what this looks like in practice?
Yeah, so just to kind of frame, AI agents are use the metaphor of nuclear, both in their power, but also their risk and what's required from a governance, permissioning, control standpoint. And it's a classic devil's in the details. Getting onto Claude or GPT, you can get results that are quite impressive early on. But as you press further, you realize the importance of having governance at the enterprise level and an overall structure. And in the agents that we have on our system, there's really three broad categories. There's the inputs, which need to be automatic and prioritized and scored. There's the actual agent engine, which needs to have a very sophisticated art of the prompting and coding, and also the oversight. And then there's the output element, which the beauty of agents is they're action oriented and they're contextual based on the user. So with that as a backdrop, I'll just touch on how we've structured our platform. Starting with the inputs, it's critical that they are automated and fully integrated, and they're reaching out to the right sources. Because the power of AI is really in the breadth and the synthesis of kind of bringing everything together, right? So the things that we have integrations into CRMs and RMSs, file systems like SharePoint and Google Drive, Outlook. So our agents can scan with the appropriate permissions, can scan incoming emails. It can, for an IR professional, it can find a question and actually search the answer library to automatically create a draft response answer, as an example. But the inputs have to be, again, they have to be integrated and broad. And they also have to be prioritized and sourced. So it's not enough, it can't be a black box. All inputs aren't created equal. When you want to get performance information, as an example, you need to code, and we've coded into our system a hierarchy of what's the most reliable source of information, a confidence coefficient. Find a second and third source to cross-reference and confirm. So that's what I would really emphasize on the input level. In terms of the engine itself, there's a little bit of an art in the prompting, and because the models and the underlying technology is changing at a breakneck speed, these are constantly changing. So we're of the belief that subject matter experts that is continuously developing, building these models, is in the best position to create prompts and to work with clients to create their own prompts. As an example, we have, as part of our structure, an optimize button. So a user can put what they're looking to achieve in plain English, and then hit the optimize button, and it'll actually combine the language of the underlying LLMs with the language of the investment industry to create suggested prompts. The other element, I mentioned going with having, one second, I'm going to go to having governance and oversight. Part of our system enables sharing with certain parties, and then an audit trail of different versions. So the owners, you can share, and from an audit trail standpoint, you can look at prior drafts of a certain agent and restore them. From a collaboration standpoint, and it's in the collaboration where these really shine, right? Where you have a team's input across multiple channels, making an agent better and better over time. But the permissioning and the governance is absolutely critical. And then finally, from the output standpoint, having the agents directed to actionable items that is contextual based on the audience. So here's an example of an initial investability screen as an example with a dummied Jones Asset Management as an example. Advisors are constantly getting the brother-in-law managers that come in. Agents can be used to do a quick, is this even investable? Should we even do the first bit of human work on this manager as an example? Things like, are they SEC registered? Do they have minimal required returns? Are there any violations? And this can be both quantitative and qualitative. In this case, there are quantitative elements of reaching a certain, again, having a certain basic level of alpha, a certain investor rank, but then a number of qualitative. You can program the agent to look at 50 different elements of legal and compliance to do that first pass. This, as an example, could save dozens of hours of pulling everything together within minutes. But you can really take it to the next level as well and create infuse an allocator's intellectual capital, intellectual property into the writing an investment committee memo, first draft. Again, first draft, to present the underlying heuristics of what an asset manager, what an allocator, their beliefs contextualized to this particular type of manager. There's a different heuristic on team structure based on whether it's a lower middle market private credit fund or a large cap growth fund, as an example. And then these investment committee memos can be catered to the audience. There's a difference between presenting to an unsophisticated retail investor versus an investment committee, as an example. On the IR side, you take a meeting prep that I mentioned earlier. There is the ability to take into account the specific circumstances of the prospect or the client. So in a meeting prep agent, as an example, the meeting prep can be a devil's advocate. Here are the 5 things that the prospect will value that you provide, relative to their current holdings. But probably more importantly, there's the blue team, red team, the devil's advocate. Here are the 5 most difficult questions that you're likely to get as a result of as a result of incorporating the intelligence of prior meetings, but also third-party information, Morningstar write-ups, media, press, all of these things kind of synthesized. So you're not kind of in your own bubble. You have that, that devil's advocate to prepare you for a meeting, as an example, just to put some concrete parameters around what can be built.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Thank you. And, I think everyone's first instinct, right, especially when they've newly unlaunched the power of something like ChatGPT or Claude is, can I just build this myself? Right. So Gardner, you've done both. And this actually gets to one of the audience questions. You've used specialist platforms and you've also kind of had a DIY approach with some generalist tools. What's a line for you? When does building it yourself stop making sense? And when do you turn to a specialist tool like Central?
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of buy versus build decision or question is probably, maybe specific to an organization's specific circumstances, but I think importantly, you need to have a partner, internal or external, who's committed to kind of getting the details right, and like really understanding those pain points. So, yeah, maybe I mentioned earlier things like formatting, footnotes, collaborative workflow features, traceability of responses. These are all little things that, if a previous response had an image that was snipped into a response and that doesn't kind of cleanly transfer over to the output on the other, the AI is generating, or the footnote number is off, like those all create little, friction areas, and you need to work through those. But I think everyone is kind of early in their AI journey, so to speak. And so you shouldn't necessarily expect that, the DDQ AI agent is going to work perfectly. But just like as Eric was saying, an analyst or associate, or maybe it was James actually, the agent needs to be developed. And so even if it's not 100% developed yet, it's critical that you have a partner who is committed to building and developing that agent with you, internal or external.
Yeah. And then, the question specifically is, are you still using a DDQ software system and linking your agentic AI tool? Did you build a new prop software using agentic AI that has tags? I think there's just a question wanting to understand how you are approaching this particular use case.
Yeah, this we are, yeah, we're using, we're using the specialist, partner, on the agent side, third party. But we see value in the generalist as well, right? I mean, I think the maybe the generalist model is an area where you can be a little bit more kind of creative and tinker with things, and play with ideas, and those like shared projects I mentioned earlier. But I think when it comes to the kind of governance and control features that you're looking for in the architecture of a specialist to also handle and work through some of those kind of pain points I mentioned earlier, like we've found that that's critical.
Yeah. And Eric, I'm sure you're having these conversations all day as you talk to users. What are you hearing, and like kind of what goes into that buy versus build decision?
Yeah, I mean, so AI to me, the real power boils down, if I had to distill it, to two big themes. First being breadth of resources and inputs, right? Really synthesizing. And
Yeah.
I think a subject matter expert knows where to find information and where to create connectors.
And
So
that's really the date, how important it is to get your data in, data in
garbage
order
in, garbage
first.
out. Precisely,
Yeah. I
precisely.
think there's a lot of when LLMs came on the scene, it was a lot of like, oh, they can work with unstructured data. They
Yeah,
can, but you
yeah,
get much better results if you give it structure.
yeah. Exactly. And we all learned early in our careers that there's a lot of power in knowing where to find information. So subject matter experts, know where to find the necessary information, where to, check. The second thing, so breadth of inputs. The second one is subject matter expertise. If you think of the analyst metaphor or the colleague metaphor, the reality is the best, heart surgeon in the world isn't going to be able to do as good of a job as a mid-level manager, researcher, or IR professional. So it really does boil down to knowing the industry, knowing how the industry works, infusing the models with intelligence off the shelf, but also knowing the workflows and the structure to enable um, clients and users to infuse their own intelligence and guiding and working with them. The having a bought solution or subject matter expert solution enables multi models. The technology is, as we all know, is changing at a breakneck speed. So having a group of advisors and partners that are obsessing over the models, nights and weekends, a broad team of what works, what doesn't work. You think about our own experience. We're using OpenAI for certain information. We're using Claude and Anthropic for others. We just introduced Gemini for some more efficient web scraping. It's an underlying portfolio of technologies to optimize the experience. And if you choose the right partner, then that's someone that can work with you to develop these agents. And as things change, you don't have to, different than kind of a consultant, it's continuous. And, you could build out an entire structure and model and find that it's obsolete, 9 months from now, and then have to start again from scratch. Last thing I'd say is we're finding groups that even have, highly sophisticated capabilities and technology resources and teams are finding that they get to a certain point where they're looking for an outsourced partner and saying, actually, we can use help for that, that last portion of the process. Probably a great example of that is the management, control, and oversight of the agents. The CTO says, I actually don't necessarily, want to be in the business of agent compliance. If you have a tool that can serve as that can help me do that, that can, serve as a nerve center to audit and enhance the collaboration in the team, then that's a powerful thing. At the end of the day, our clients are in the business of generating alpha and generating sales, and they really don't want to be in the business of managing the nuances of this technology.
And just laughing inside at the HR for agents, this wild, wild, wonderful world of things that I never thought I would say. I know we're getting tight on time, so I'm gonna have to jump around a bit, but I do want to get into governance because that's incredibly important. And James, what does good governance look like when you're when you are the HR of agents, when your employees are agents rather than people, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, governance is super important, right? Like this industry is built on trust. And so having governance in place is super important, right? And it's we talked about some of the details around when you're collecting that information, if AI is generating, if it's maybe sloppy in the response or it's not quite polished. And I recall being in a meeting with a very successful investment manager in Edinburgh, and there was a mistake on the presentation, and he absolutely blew up. And I was like, I don't understand, what's the big deal here? And the importance was, it's like, this is a trust business, and those first impressions matter. And if you can make a mistake here, what's stopping you from making a mistake in allocating a trade or making an investment decision? And where's the oversight and where's the governance around that? And so he was actually really attacking the system, saying we have to have a system of good governance and oversight. Yes, we might make mistakes, but we have to catch them. And so I think it's super important. And it's kind of a little trickier than before, right? Like you'd have a one-on-one meeting with your employees. Now, how do you evaluate those agents? So I think there's probably a couple pieces that we need to think about. So governance is around the data. Who owns the data? Where does it sit? And I think there are some ways we can kind of navigate that. And then there's also the governance around what do you do with the data, and have you got the right scope of that and the right decisions, and how do you evaluate that? And so maybe one idea, and we would do this on a regular period, would be review, for example, the performance of our research team. How is the research team performing in terms of their rankings and their decisions, and had an analytical measure to understand, is the process working? And so similarly, I think on the agentic side, you almost think about creating your own governance agent, which evaluates the system. Is the system working? Like, am I making mistakes, or am I consistently getting information or missing information in that process? So I think there are some performance benchmarking and some kind of oversight that is an important piece on that. The other part of the governance is, I wonder if we can streamline some of these things, right? Like we're kind of our own worst enemies, and I feel somewhat sorry for gardeners talking about like the DDQs. Is that we're our own worst enemy. We create these really complicated questions because we want to do a really good job at getting all the answers, and then we push copy and paste to 100 different investment managers. They've all got to answer that. We're imposing a cost on them. And so they're all trying to do, and then the next allocator comes along with a slightly different but very similar DDQ question, and they've got to respond to that. And so I wonder if there's a better way of actually, more sort of the repository type approach, where Gardner has level 1 access, level 2 access, level 3 access for his data, and they construct the data. And my agents go and say, hey, I want to understand what's going on in a Gardner's firm. Tell me about how the AUM is, or the firm changes, or people changes, or performance, or any. It's all there. And rather than me asking a question and him having to respond to the question, and then me having to interpret the answer to the question, I can just ask the question directly. And the tools are pretty good at doing that, right? You ask the question, it goes and synthesizes all the documents, and comes back with the answer. So I think we can change some of the workflows there that will help improve the governance, reduce the number of steps, and have control in that instance. Gardner still gets to control what information goes out, who gets what, and rather than it being unique to each and every individual, you can kind of put it into some different levels of access, because he probably doesn't want everything to be out there for everybody. That's why some of these products and businesses are private.
Eric, do you think we're heading to an agent-to-agent future in that respect that James just laid out?
Yeah, I mean, agent to agent, yes, but with human oversight and sign off from that subject matter expert, and continuing to have those reconciliation tools.
I mean, how did you, and Eric, I want to come back to you on this question, but staying with you, Gardner, for a moment, how do you keep compliance happy and comfortable with all of this, especially kind of on the DDQ use case?
Honestly, I mean, if you just take say a quarterly letter, writing process as an example, right? And you're looking at a portfolio risk report that you're kind of deriving an outline from based on that information or that data in that report. I mean, the agent's really kind of doing the same thing, right? And then I'm using those same reports to kind of verify, trust but verify, what maybe the analyst or associate used to do and now the agent is doing. So it's in a lot of ways very similar. It's just faster and more efficient. But yeah, I don't think I'm quite ready for agent to agent without any human oversight or subject matter expert oversight.
Eric, do you think that's inevitable?
Yeah, so my view is, our industry has done a really good job over the last couple decades of bifurcating alpha from beta. right? Beta being the table stakes and really focusing attention on alpha. I think there'll be a similar structure in the agentic world where there will be kind of the basic um, beta, the agent to agent elements, and perhaps this can streamline, the dance that goes back and forth between allocators and managers. XYZ left the firm to quote, spend more time with family. And then an immediate response back, well, do they have gardening leave? What's their non-compete? It's like, well, actually, like, what do you think they'll merge? A lot of, the BS kind of can get truncated to really focus on the alpha, to really focus on the critical element of how much, in this example, how much of a loss, was this individual to the team, rather than the kind of the dance back and forth. So I think the agent to agent will be fine, but a better execution of the agents will be a small source of alpha, and agents that prompt the human decisions that play devil's advocate, that challenge the ultimate decision maker, will be where the alpha really lies. And the magic is in having those agents not be generic, not be beta, but not be passive, but really focus attention.
You need good people, you need good agents. And I will
Yeah.
say, I'll make one plug. AIMA's been at this problem since 1997 with the first standard DDQ. So it's a long standing passion of
Right.
ours. Gardner, you were going to say
No,
something.
I was just going to say, I mean, I guess it paralleled Eric's comments, at a very high level, if we kind of think about our function as some combination of knowledge transfer and mind share. We need to get the knowledge transfer component of the equation right, whether it's helping our LPs understand how our portfolios are performing and why, how our organization is evolving and why. But the mind share component is a really important ingredient to kind of developing trusted partnerships, and driving LP engagement. So I think on that knowledge transfer piece, that's where AI can really kind of drive some efficiencies for us, and allow us to spend a little bit more time on the mind share component.
Coming into the last kind of 2 minutes, James, Gardner, Eric, like super quick for someone listening, kind of wanting to get off zero with this. Maybe they've used chatbots, but they haven't dipped their toes into agents. Any word of advice for them? James, I'll have you go first.
So I think the most important part here is remembering that the primary job is identifying skillful managers and allocating capital. And so often we get dragged into the operational burden and spend all our time and energy on that without actually forgetting about what's really important to make that decision. So I would start with really laying out what are the most important attributes for me to make good decisions, good investment decisions. And then you can start, build that up from there. And I would kind of probably just segregate it out into some of the kind of key components, both qualitative and quantitative, and really think about the data. We can do amazing things with prompts in this business. Trust and access to data are super important. I don't want to be making my decisions off public information or Reddit comments or Yahoo prices. I want to have some integrity in the underlying data. So I think you've got to figure out, don't spend too much time trying to play with the prompt engines on your desktop. I think about what data you want to access, and then start one at a time, and then you can orchestrate that back. So that kind of builds centers of excellence in how we do our analytical data, how we might write our attribution reports, or how we might synthesize qualitative information, and then you can orchestrate that back up. So I would start small and then build from there.
Okay, Gardner and Eric, you each have like about 10 seconds. So literally one word.
I would say maniacally.
All I would say is failure is part of the journey.
Failure is part of the journey.
Okay.
Love that maniacal focus. Is that what I heard?
Me, it's maniacally focused on organization and governance. These things can really get out of hand, and be maniacally focused on organization and governance.
Wonderful. Well, I am maniacally focused on the time, and we are at it. So thank you so much for your attention, everyone in the audience. Thank you to Eric, Gardner, and James. It is so powerful to learn from our peers who are attacking the same problems as we're all figuring our way out with this technology. So I'm so grateful to you, and I encourage people who have additional questions upon reflection to get in touch. Thanks and have a great Friday.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you. Thank you.